Midjourney, right, sued by Disney, which Disney like rocked it. Like, here's Yoda. I prompted for Yoda in Midjourney and I got Yoda.
Send prompts, not nudes. I just want to AI some shit.
We've seen sort of the mentality of like build MOE, take MOE, through whether that's a serverless agent structure or literal like multi-agent, and turn that into, use that training data to create, a single one-dimensional chatbot that mimics reasoning. I firmly disagree with Apple's paper. I'm going to come out and say it, like hot take, like it's horse and just shows that, like, honestly, I think that a company that's willing to publish that has no clue what's actually going on. And it's really, really sad, personally. But to look at what something like that comes out, I didn't even finish reading it because I got to the examples where they started calling it out. And I literally just like laughed out loud. I was just like, they have no clue what they're doing. Like, this is testing. And then trying to pit models up that are years behind, like, well, years and AI years. they're like 6 months behind, but it feels like years, as the premier example. And they're not even building good structure. Like, they're trying to use like one-dimensional chat interactions to build agent structure and having the agent figure things out. Like, in the moment, it's like, no, that's just not how it works. Like, it has to have very, very specific system prompting for that function of that MOE sitting there, like doing only that. And that's all it does. And it only brings that level of thought or benefit back to the larger group. Which just like blows me away that we're still like having this debate at that level of enterprise, that like they just don't know what's going on and they publish that as a research paper. Blows my mind. And then, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have things like Anthropic blackmailing humans. Like, I just like,
I didn't want to bring it up because I've been trying to use Claude so much, and it threatened me, and so great.
It did.
Now I'm gonna have to. No.
I haven't had it do anything, but I have had to tell it to fucking do what I tell it to do way more than I used to. It is stubborn as and it which really pisses me off, because if you look at the new version, it is definitely better contextually across large code sets. Like, it does way better integration, definitely has better like component and feature knowledge, where it's like, oh, this part should look like this and fit into this puzzle, right? And that's how this section of code should work. And at the same time, you try to work with it and it totally does dumb. Like, just epic dumb. And you're like, why would you do that? Oh, well, I don't know. I needed to fix this UI component over here. And it's like, I told you to fix the auth and remove the false, turn it into a null so that I can load my auth and use my app. And it's like, yeah, but I want to work on the UI. After 5 of those, I'm sitting there like, oh my God, I'm triggered at this point by my AI. So like, that's been my biggest problem with Claude lately. It's almost funny. Like, its intelligence, it's increased intelligence. I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, has caused it to be a bigger pain in my.
I've seen that too. I think they actually got to check. I might have downgraded to 3.7 just to avoid some of that.
I go back and forth.
Yeah, I think that's another argument, against the super model, at least the 2025 vintage, because having a more fine-tuned model on your specific use, or at least knowing that your system prompts are going to get it where you need it to go, probably better than a model that thinks it's smart.
Yeah, I think that even though, and I think Anthropic's still using very, very large MOEs, if I'm not mistaken. Like, they're still doing like the whole like very small, specialized, like large MOE structure. I'm not sure. I need to go actually read that. But that was when they first made significant progress. The you can tell that it definitely functions better than 3.7, but the areas that it functions worse, it is way worse. Like it's distinctly worse. And to me, that like comes back to the whole, well, you're never going to be able to take something that is predictive in nature and predict the right thing always. It's going to be tuned for the thing you need it to predict the best. And the other stuff is secondary, tertiary, right? Priorities in that predictive nature. And eventually you're going to get to a point where the predictive capability just dwindles and is no longer usable or is a pain in your. And to me, that's almost where the larger or premier model MOEs are going to kind of come in, where you strap three of those together, and one specialized in code, one specialized in like human interaction and chatting, one specialized in business rules and tool usage. And all of a sudden you have a three agent structure using three premier models. Yes, you're using more API calls. Hopefully you don't have to use their code or their API calls. You have something on your own. But like that three agent structure will kick something's like one dimensional structures all day.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had a debate recently with someone about why MOEs and fine-tuned models would kick ass versus even something like that. And I think that the degree of specificity that the model can understand your domain and your perspective, right, is always going to be limited. Just because even though they have trillions of examples, the more specific you think you are, someone working in AI technology, in Ohio with 5070 GPU has a question about a specific thing, that latency that might impact something. Like, as you start being more specific in your request, the number of examples that the AI can train on and the likelihood that it can generalize to your answer goes down. Maybe not the best example, but like definitely like seeing like specialized like law, fine-tuned AIs, or some of the fine-tuning that we've done on domain-specific AIs. And I think a lot of people still think that you can just take a big AI, do some RAG on it, and you'll get good enough results. But again, I think a lot of this is like people don't have as much hands-on experience with like well working AI as possible. I think there's a lot of like hype at the macro level, and then like really specific niches that are in tools that are wrappers. But a lot of times I think there's a lot of misconception about like what an MOE is and how it works, and why it works sometimes better than a fine tune, and why sometimes just fine tune, prompt engineer the crap out of a specific use case will get you where you need to go.
Yeah, I think that we still see that a lot with clients. There's a significant amount of dialogue around, I don't know, myths, or I don't know, urban myths, maybe is a good way to put it. But it's like it's that one guy who's been on LinkedIn long enough, who had 500,000 followers when AI first kicked off, who now has 1 million because he started talking about AI and doesn't do AI, doesn't touch AI, has no clue what he's talking about, but he has 1 million followers and he's the loudest person in the room with 8,000 likes as soon as he posts. So every single time LinkedIn pushes it to the top, and his hook is, "Oh my God, ChatGPT is dead because insert stupid comment." And that right now is weighted heavier, where CISOs and highly intelligent people in professions hear it, and they hear it enough, or they see it on the news, because Fox News is a reputable source. And if it's actually like part of the marketing stuff that we're hearing about, like 7 touches, right? But like same concept from a psychological perspective, the more you hear it, the more likely you are to like take on that belief that it's true. So if AI is stealing your data and you hear it on the news and you see it on LinkedIn, and the US government's fearful that R1 is going to steal its data, and Microsoft did a fine tune of R1 and now offers it, but US government won't touch it because R1's going to steal your data. So like you hear it enough and all of a sudden it's a true thing for you. And I think one of the interesting conversations I had recently was around deterministic. And it's really funny because there's a specific thing in the AI studio that forces LLMs to reply only on data that they were given access to. Otherwise, they have to deny it. And that little button is the bane of a lot of people's existence because they don't know what it does. So they don't turn it off and they don't mess with those little scrolls, right? They use the pre-config like build and they sit there and interact with it. And we heard this, you heard it from one client and I heard it from another client. And they're like, we couldn't get it to work. It sucked. It didn't answer. Actually, that's 3 clients because there's another one that I'm thinking about too. It sucked. It wouldn't give us answers, yada, yada, yada. It would only answer like specifically, like exactly this. Of course, they're not using like semantic hybrid search. They're using just like keyword or semantic. And either way, that one toggle will change the entire way that experience goes. But their experience was so frustrating and so bad because of a single checkbox that like they thought that it was absolute trash and they didn't want to use it. And it's funny because you look at that type of interaction and to me, like that was the other side. Like one of the clients was like, well, you can't get deterministic. And I was like, you want to see deterministic? I can show you deterministic. And they saw it and they were like, oh, that's interesting. Like, how did you get it to do that? And I'm like, well, you can do it this way. You can do it in code or you can do it in prompting. I mean, technically you can do Pydantic. There's a whole bunch of methods that can make me capable of governing or locking an LLM down so it cannot do anything I do not want it to do. But why? It defeats the entire purpose of using an LLM. If you want to do that, use RPA, use robot process automation, or use one of the chatbots that Microsoft made 20 years ago that is a process and uses a decision tree. Don't use a chatbot. Deterministic goes so far, and the whole point of an LLM is reading between the lines, using that context and using things that don't connect and starting to bring that information together. Too deterministic is pointless.
Well, fully deterministic, I agree. I mean, that's just like a really expensive classifier.
Exactly.
But like what I like is the blend of like a thinking about here are the tools that I can use to solve a problem. And going into it, I may not know how the agent is going to solve the problem, right? But when it is using a tool or it's going down a specific path, like that has guardrails and can only do so much, especially if it's sending a write instruction or it's changing something, right? Like that better be deterministic. And if I'm talking to a client in a space where I have to know who's asking and what they're asking for, so that we don't send the wrong data into the pipes. That could be an important place for deterministic. And yeah, RPA would probably solve some of that too. But
I think it's the difference
where you're operating.
Yeah, I think to your point, the difference is kind of like this: like when there's not information, what do I want it to respond with? Right? I can prompt that, and 9 times out of 10, we will get that proper response when the right information or the information is absent. That one time is probably going to do something weird or it's going to answer something similar. But if you prompt it even stricter and you prompt really well, you can get 10 out of 10 all day long and not have an issue. It becomes problematic when you're in regulated space, you're in those like areas where you have to answer a certain way. I don't know why, but my brain goes back to like financing and mortgage home loans, because like that was a specific area that like you cannot say the wrong thing and you can't just be, I don't know if I want to say this on a podcast, for lack of a better term, I'm going to over summarize, but like even mentioning a person's race, color, ethnicity can have impacts in any type of mortgage lending. Just because you're using it or you want to use it doesn't mean you can. It may be factually or statistically correct, but it doesn't make it something that you're allowed to make a determination on, which is like super interesting in AI, especially LLMs when they're predictive in nature. So like, I
Mhm.
don't, my brain goes back to that where it's like, yes, as soon as I could see OpenAI's models, especially because they sucked up the internet, just answering some egregious that like
Yeah.
there's no way they'd be allowed to do, and trying to
Oh,
prompt around that and block it from saying that.
this is a sitcom idea. Someone should go out on like VO3 or like in a real like production studio and just like create like The Office, but they're the ones who are like, host training the original like Chat GPT, GPT-3 and 4, right? And their job is to just like, filter out the internet and like the personal lives of people who have to look at that garbage. Like I can imagine like a very depressing like or another parallel. And I love I love how I don't think you've ever seen the TV series Silicon Valley,
I have,
but
well, I mean, I've seen the
you
videos
see
you
the clips
sent, and
I've sent you.
I keep, you're not the only person that sends them to me. I constantly get people that are
Yeah,
sending
yeah.
them.
The 10 years ago, 15 years ago when it came out, they had a whole bunch of things on AI, and there's one on image recognition, and the guy sells his app for a couple $1 million because it was able to, at the time, it's a big deal, is identify food on a plate, but it gets sold to a company that is basically using the hot dog recognition to screen out nudes from their social feed. So his job has become staring at these things all day long in order to vest out and have his millions of dollars. And I don't know. That could be. There are some stories that are probably protected by a 99-year NDA about the kind of that had to be done to train the model to not look like the internet.
That's funny. If you think about where we're at from a data perspective, I think this brings up like a lot of our topics that we talk about like internally, like where do we go from here and where is data generated? And like really we're reaching a point where data is generated by organizations that don't want to give up their data. Like that's where we're, I think actually we're here. We're at that point where the data that's generated is somehow proprietary and is going to get people in legal issues in some way, shape, or form. But the other, you brought up a fun sort of side of this. Like if you think about Midjourney, right, sued by Disney, which, you know, I will say the way they brought up the lawsuit was probably way better than what was it? Not New York Times. Was it New York Times?
New York Times sued someone.
I can't remember. Some publisher, one of the media publishers, tried to sue OpenAI, and they
Yep,
lost.
New York
And that was a
Times.
pretty, yeah, New York Times. And like the way they did it was pretty shitty, and the way that they tried to prove it was pretty shitty, and the way that they tried to correlate the data was even shittier. And it was also kind of like, why didn't you just use like a graph rag and ask your AI questions, because you could find better answers to how close the data was. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. But Disney like rocked it. Like, here's Yoda. I prompted for Yoda in Midjourney, and I got Yoda. And I did this with Chewbacca, and I did this like straight up prove like it. I love Midjourney. I think Midjourney is an awesome company. I think what they did, especially in the image world, like they fell behind on innovation, but they've been steadily improving their product. It's kind of like lagged with utility and the application, but I will say they were the first one to really impress me with image generation.
Mm-hmm.
And like to see them get sued is like, oh, that kind of sucks. But when I look at what they did, they kind of set themselves up for this failure. So, have you ever really dug into Midjourney prompting?
A little bit, but like
Did you
very
ever
slowly.
learn in the style of or
Yes.
use it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You're literally naming the artist,
Right.
like verbatim. This artist, use their style, replicate how they do things. Which I always like looked at that and was like, did they ask the artist to do that? How many of these artists did they get approval from? Are they paying them? Like, and some
No.
of them, I don't think it matters. Like in the grand scheme of, you know, even if you're a big name artist in photography or a big name artist in, you know, painting, you're not raking in millions. Yes, you may make a big bankroll on a single painting or nailing a banana to the wall, but you're you're only doing that so many times that you're allowed to do it. And at the end of the day, your advertising and your overhead and your cost for your studio just it doesn't work out. Artists do not make stupid money at all. It's just, unless you're a digital artist and your overhead is nothing when you're passing your stuff over, it is too much. And I actually get to talk about this intelligently because my grandfather was a professional artist and actually was an art restoration at the National Museum in DC. Yeah, he ran art restoration for the National Art Museum in DC, and like literally my summers I spent in his studio. Great studio, awesome, huge studio, but like he spent more time on art restoration than he did painting, and he would sell paintings for big chunks of change, but like that money's in and out. Like, it's crazy. You do one show and the show overhead alone is, you have to rent the space and you have to advertise. And like, by the time you're done, 3 or 4 paintings in, you're just covering, you're break even. So art scene is horrible. It's horrible. But if you think about like Midjourney, I think it'd be awesome for AI companies, and music is one of the other areas that I think would be awesome, to actually partner with bands, to actually partner with musicians, to partner with artists. And I think the niche is different. Can I make really cool music with, AI? Yes, I can make really cool music with AI. Most of the AI music that I listen to is not great. Like, it's okay, and sometimes it's decent, and sometimes somebody has like that one hit wonder AI moment where the prompt really hit well. But like, I think I've generated over 13,000 songs, and of the 13,000 songs that I've created, I've shared maybe 30, maybe 40. That's not good margins. But if you're thinking about art or some of these areas where you could somehow give back to that community, I think it would be really, really powerful to turn that into some sort of monetization deal. Like, especially, I specifically call out like Suno. I think Midjourney would be a great example. I think, talk about flipping the thing on its head. Instead of like Disney suing, why didn't Disney approach Midjourney and offer a deal?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, hey, AI is the future. We realize that. Like, we're a media company. We're entertainment. How about, instead of suing the out of you, you give us a cut? And we're going to feed you images. We're going to give you our art. We're going to help you with our Imagineers. We're going to push you up so that we both benefit from this situation. And I think that some of these big enterprises that are trying to toll gate or gate people from innovation are going to realize this very quick. Like, they're not going to win. Like, you can try lawsuits, but you're not going to beat everybody, and you're not going to be able to keep up. You're out there, and all it takes is a camera pointing at it to replicate it.
From whiskey pours to AI wars, thanks for tuning in. Stay curious, stay questioning, and we'll catch you in the next episode.